we got to the yesterday. We got to the spies, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu got angry. Yeah, you know, let's go from verse number 40. Let's go from 41 because we touched on it yesterday, but let's just go through it again. V'tanu v'tomu elai, chatanu laHashem anachnu na'aleh v'nilchamnu k'chol asher tzivanu Hashem Elokeinu v'tachgu ish es klei milchamtoi v'ta'aniu la'aloi sahara. So after the mistake they made of sending in the spies and coming back and listening to the bad reports and deciding that they're going to, and then being decreed upon them that they weren't going to go into the land of Israel, so then the Jewish people decided that we were mistaken and we sinned, and we have to go into the land of Israel. Vayom Hashem elai. So God said to me, Emor lehem lo yisalu v'lo yisilchamu ki eineni bekir bechem. So God told Moshe to tell the Jewish people, don't do it, because I'm not with you. And we spoke about this, when was it? Yesterday, I think, that if you don't have God together with you, if you have God together with you, you don't have to worry about anything.
Yes, you'll be defeated.
For sure, right? And if you don't have God with you, then it's gonna be rough. You're not going to win. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling them straight out through Moshe Rabbeinu that there's no way that you're going to be able to succeed at what it is that you want to do, because I'm not together with you. And I told you and you didn't listen to me. And you said, forget it, we're going to go up. You know what I was supposed to, I forgot, I was going to look up and see, who was it? Somebody else yesterday, how many people died? A lot of people died in this attempt to get into the land of Israel. I don't remember how many, but according to one opinion in the Gemara, you know that the famous Nevuah, the famous prophecy of Yechezkel, of the dry bones. According to one opinion in the Gemara, these dry bones, where did they come from? It's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu just, produced dry bones from nowhere and brought them to, so according to one opinion in the Gemara, the dry bones came from these people that tried to get into the land of Israel. Which is, it's an interesting thing over here, which means that did they do the wrong thing? They did the wrong thing, but they did it for the right reason. Which means most of the times when we're doing the wrong things, we're doing them for the wrong reason, right? When we do something that we're not supposed to do, we sin, we're doing it because we're overwhelmed with the desire to do it. Over here, they were sure that this is what was going to rectify the mistake that they've made, and they did something they should never have done. So there's a residue over here of some kind of good, something positive inside of all of that. So the bones were brought back to life, right? Those are the bones that were brought back to life.
It's from the tribe of Yosef, yeah?
Yeah, they were mostly from the tribe of Ephraim, these people, right? Ephraim, of course, is Menashe and Ephraim from the tribe of Yosef. And then it says, Kasher Ta'asena, it's interesting, it says over Yetei Moriha Yeshet Baharahu Likraschem, so that the Amorites went out to attack you. Kasher Ta'asena Hadvarim, like the bees do. So again, the sages explain what's the big deal, what's this putting together the Amorites together with the bees, like what's the big deal? So certain kind of bees, when they sting, they die. All bees. So that's what it says over here, that they came out like swarms of bees to attack the Jewish people, but ultimately it caused their own death as well. You've got to be, it's interesting. When the suicide bombings began over here in Israel, which is, what are we going back?
To the Intifada.
First Intifada. When are we going 94. Back to when? 90, yeah? 94, 96, when is it? Whenever. I mean, we're going back a while already, well over 10 years, that's for sure. One of the problems was, not, when you've got an enemy who wants to stay alive, so at least you know that you're kind of on a common ground. Right? So each one's trying to stay alive, and whoever's going to be safer is he's the one that's going to come out of this. When you've got an enemy that doesn't care about their own life, then there's not very much you can do to protect yourself. Right? When these people, you've got people that get up onto buses and blow themselves up, that's something which is almost impossible to deal with. Towards the end of the Second World War, they had kamikaze pilots, the Japanese. There weren't very many of them. But it was one of and actually they were incredibly incompetent.
They sank
Baruch Hashem. They sank the Lexington, but most of what they did was completely ineffectual, Baruch Hashem. But it was one of the things that the American army had absolutely no way of being able to combat, was what do you do with somebody who they don't care whether they live or die? There's nothing you can do about it. So they drive their planes full of explosives straight into the boats, and it doesn't matter. They'll try to shoot them down.
9/11, come on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Absolutely, which means that people are prepared to give up their lives in order to take other people's lives. That's a completely different kind of a reality than from regular warfare. In regular warfare, most people are happy to keep themselves alive.
That's right. We're in a lot of trouble if they do that.
I heard an interview yesterday from somebody who is an expert in Hamas, a professor here in Israel, whose name I have forgotten. And he spent the last 15 years, researching Hamas, and he knows Hamas backwards and forwards. And he asked, the interview asked him a very interesting question. It was actually quite a disturbing answer, actually. He said that that Hamas have taken an incredible battering. They've lost an awful lot of people in this, in this battle, the war that's going on right now. And he asked him whether he felt that it had been given whether it had been given at least a wound that will, that will keep them down for a while. And he says, you don't understand. He says, even if there's only one left, he'll come out of his bunker, right, with his Kalashnikov, and waving his fingers like this in a victory signal, and he'll be convinced that they've succeeded, they've won, because they don't measure victory in the way that other people measure victory. Victory by them has got nothing to do with how many people they've lost or how many people they've killed. It's just to do with being in a state of battle. It's a different state of mind altogether. It's something which is very difficult. It's a little bit like the bees. The bees go out and they sting, and they're going to die. But the important thing is to sting. ויעקצו אתכם בסעד חומר, ותשבו ותבכו לפני השם, ולא ישמע השם בקולכם, ולא יזינו עליכם. And then after the Jewish people went out and they were all massacred by the Amorites, we then came back and we, of course, started crying to God, and God didn't listen to them. The Jewish people are experts at retroactive listening to God. God says no, and the Jewish people do it anyway. And then they run into the most enormous problems, and they come back and they start crying to God. And it's like, of course we should have listened to God. Why didn't we think about that first off? V'teishvu b'kadesh yamim rabim. Here, so remember we mentioned this yesterday. Interesting. Rashi mentions, what does it mean that they stayed in Kadesh for yamim rabim, for many days? So Rashi mentions that they were there for 19 years. They camped for 19 years in one place, right? So we're talking about being in the desert for 40 years, and out of those 19 years they were in one place, and there's another 41 stops on the way.
It's the same amount of time they were wandering around as they were in one place. 19 years each time. Yeah.
I mean, the truth is that the 40 years is not really 40 years, it's really 38 years, because the 1 year going in, the 1 year at the end, they put it all together, right? So the truth is that there were half of the time that they were there in the desert, they were in one place. So you're saying to yourself, so it was good. So the answer is no, it's not good. Why is it not good? Because they had no idea that they were going to be there for 19 years. Part of the trial of going through the desert was having to pitch camp and not know how long you're going to be there for. We spoke about, when was it? Last week, I can't remember, but the idea of presumably several times they would have pitched their camp, and by the time they pitched their camp, the cloud or the pillar of fire would pick itself up, and off it would go, start moving again. And they've just pitched, they've just put everything out and got everything ready, and now they've got to take it all apart and put it, pack it all up again and go.
Is that a test of faith?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So in the same way as Abraham was tested with his faith.
Absolutely, right? Avraham Avinu was sent Lech Lecho. He doesn't know where he's going, and he's just got to go, right? And that's his test of faith. The Jewish people over here have got a test of faith in a similar kind of a way, which they've got no idea. Which means that you can stay in a place for 19 years, but every minute of those 19 years, you don't know whether you're going to be told to go or not. But there's no concept of being able to settle down. Right? One of the inyanim of being able to live a life of tranquility is the ability to be able to know that tomorrow you're still going to be here tomorrow, and the next day you'll still be here, and the day after that you'll still be here.
That must have created a terrific amount of insecurity.
Yes, I think so. Right, but the insecurity, of course, it's interesting that there is negative insecurity and there's positive insecurity. When you feel so insecure that it makes you rely on God, right? It makes you recognize that you've got no other entity that you can rely upon except for God, then that's great. Very often insecurity does the other thing, right? It pushes you away from God because you're so insecure you don't see that God is there anymore, and that's terrible.
You blame God for your...
Yeah, whatever. Although I tell the emphasis like this, that blaming God is still better than not seeing God. Right? The minute you're blaming God, at least you recognize that God is there. And it's interesting, you should know that the sages say that being an idol worshipper is better than being an atheist.
Really?
Because at least when you're an idol, you recognize that there's a power out there. You recognize, or powers, whatever you're worshipping, you recognize there's something there. You're just pointing in the wrong direction, that's all. Which means the ability to be able to work with somebody and say, look, no, here, let me point you in the right direction, is something which is far, far easier than somebody who doesn't believe in God to begin with. So somebody who's angry, how's this for a paradox? Somebody who's angry at God is in better shape than somebody who doesn't believe in God. Because at least you understand you've got who to be angry at. That's a sign that you recognize that God has got power, and that, I don't know, God's got it against you right now, right? God is working against you. It's an interesting thing. It's a very fundamental point. It really is. You know, a psychologist once told me, what is the opposite of love?
Fear.
Fear. Most people say hate, and he said the opposite of love is apathy.
Is non-love.
Non-love, no love, apathy, what he called apathy. The opposite of hate is also apathy, which means love and hate are not opposites of each other. Love and hate are the two ends of the spectrum of the same emotional spectrum. They're not opposites of each other. They utilize exactly the same emotional resources that a person has got. For one thing, I'll tell you more than that, anybody, you love somebody, right? The crossover between love and hate is something which meanders backwards and forwards very easily. Right? That you can love somebody and then a moment later you hate them and then a moment later you love them again. However you want to describe or define hate, but it's something, they're just, love and hate are very, very powerful emotions. Apathy is a lack of emotion, which means that the opposite of hate and the opposite of love is really just not caring one way or the other. I don't actively hate you, but I don't love you either. That's a state of
unknown, kind of.
Huh?
You're saying that apathy is a state of kind of unknown in your relationship.
You know what? Not unknown. I think unknown. I think just call it undefined. Right? Apathy is a state of undefined. I'm not defining what my relationship. I don't like you or dislike you enough to define my relationship with you.
Yeah, kind of get used to it. And then with that situation, let's say something happens in your life, or let's say you just come out of whatever. You were depressed or whatever, and then you come to that being of apathy where you don't know where your relationship really stands with God, and then suddenly God puts you in a very good, he puts you in a brilliant circumstance. That apathy can change directly to love then, because you love him because of the fact that he's now showing you something.
Which means that apathy is a state of if you want to look at love and hate as being numbers, positive numbers and negative numbers. Right, so love is from 1 to 10, and hate is from -1 to -10. Apathy is 0. Everything's open. You can swing either way, but it requires an emotional. You've got to make a stance. You've got to make a decision over here.
So you don't feel anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Which means that a person, again, is this idea of feeling angry at God. This idea of having all kinds of very, very powerful complaints against God for what's going on in your personal life, or what's going on even in perhaps in a greater circle in your communal life, whatever it is, right? That, believe it or not, is a reasonably healthy state to be in. Because it means that you recognize that God is there and you're angry with God because he's not doing what you want him to do. So fine, you need to fine-tune your relationship with God to recognize.
Surely by having that stance, you're completely rejecting free.
You're
rejecting free will, kind of.
No, I think if anything, you're utilizing your free will to say that God's doing this wrong.
But then you're kind of saying, right, do you know what? You're not looking at your actions. You're saying my actions weren't wrong, God's actions were
Absolutely. Wrong. Which means that you're misguided
Oh, I've got you now.
Right?
Yeah.
But exactly what you're saying is correct, right? What are you saying? You're saying that I want things to be like this, and God has decided that they're supposed to be like that, and that's wrong. That's not the way it's supposed to be.
But
Which is you're coming.
Not apathy.
That's not apathy. Quite the opposite. That's a very strong emotional reaction.
You know, apathy engenders a very violent reaction from the person you're apathetic to. They get very angry when you don't react to
Good.
them.
Right? Why is that? Because as human beings, we crave some kind of an interaction. That's part of who we are, right? That's already from the beginning, when Adam was created. And Adam looks around and he gives names to all of the animals, and he sees that every animal has a mate, and he realizes that he doesn't have a mate, and it bothers him. And he comes to God and says, I want somebody as well. And then God says, okay, I'll give you. That desire to be together with somebody, that desire to have interaction, that desire to require, how does that phrase go? No man is an island. We have to have, the vast majority of people, we have to have interaction. If you don't need any interaction with other people, then it means there's probably something not quite right.
Why, like I understood that Gan Eden is like a perfect state of existence. Like it's just perfect. It doesn't get more perfect than that. Why did he see a flaw? Like, how could he see a flaw? Like, he didn't have any Yitzhak.
Yeah, so it's interesting that according to the sages, before God brought the animals to him, he didn't see that flaw.
So when the animals came here...
When the animals came and he saw that every animal has a mate, and then he realizes, hold on a second, each one of them is paired up and I'm not, then that means I'm missing something.
Yeah.
You can only miss something if you know that it's not there. Right?
But didn't God create man to be fruitful and multiply?
After he separated Eve, and they became two separate entities.
Yes, but there was no way that Adam was going to reproduce.
No, here
himself.
So that's a shot. After they were separated, then God commands them to be fruitful and multiply, which means only once the ability is there does God say this is what you have to do. Before that, there's no command before that.
Purpose in creating Adam.
The Emma says it was, but it says that the sages say like this is a fascinating idea. The sages say that if God would have created Adam and Eve as two separate entities from the beginning, and the story would have unfolded as it unfolded, with Eve eating from the tree of knowledge, and then coming to Adam and getting him to eat from the tree of knowledge, then Adam would have turned around to God and says, I am taking no responsibility whatsoever. You gave me this woman. She wasn't the right woman for me. That's not my pair. And finished. It's not my responsibility. So say the sages, the most incredible thing over here. God created Adam and waited for Adam to come to him and say, I want a partner. And then God says, okay, I'll make you a partner. And at that point, after things start going wrong, whose responsibility was it? It was Adam's responsibility, not God's. I don't want to get involved over here in the great picture of God knowing what's going to be anyway. But the idea is like we spoke about yesterday, this idea of taking responsibility for your actions. It's something very, very basic to Judaism. It really is. The truth is, it's supposed to be something very basic to human beings in general. Right? All humans are supposed to take responsibility for their actions. Jews have a greater responsibility. Right? Because our actions are supposed to reflect God's presence here in the world.
But I don't understand like why he looked at it this, like, I'm sure, like, there's no easy answer, but like, why didn't he look at it in another way, like say, thank God I'm whole, like I don't need a partner,
I think, it's a good question, but I think the answer is because Adam was a physical being, right? Physical beings have physical needs. And when he sees the animals, right? I'm trying to say this in as gentle a way as possible, but the physical dimension of who we are is the animalistic dimension of who we are.
That's what God put in us, so we reproduce the race. If you didn't have those feelings,
sure.
You wouldn't...
But it's more than that. God put into us animalistic feelings in order for us also to be able to control them. Where animals don't control their animalistic behavior. For some inexplicable reason, animals behave like animals, right? I don't know why. Human beings are not supposed to behave like animals because we have a soul as well. Right? This divine dimension is what makes us different from everybody else, and that difference is what's going to define our ability to be able to not just behave in an animalistic fashion. So when Adam sees the animals, each one with a pair, the animal side of him says, wait a second, where's my pair? I need one too. Yeah.
But that's when my issue with the whole story of Adam and Eve comes in. The second Adam finds his pair, there's no interaction between them. The first thing that they do is they literally sleep together. So then therefore, do you know what I mean? It's that contradiction thing where your main interaction between the opposite sex should be that.
Well,
yeah.
It's not apathy, it's that diversity. Right?
Which means, I think the pshat is like this, that the animalistic dimension of the relationship between a man and a woman is something which is inescapable. You can't miss it, right? And I really think that that's what we're being taught. After that, there is now the dimension of something which is far more spiritual and far greater than that, which was something that Adam and Eve had to build together. We're lucky nowadays, right? Because we know that already. And now we know that when we go out or when when we're in engagement period or whatever it is, we know that we have a certain spiritual dimension to our relationship over here that has to be built up. I said on many occasions, right, marriage is called kiddushin.
Yes, it's a method of controlling our animalistic impulses.
That's true, but on a more positive note, right, kiddushin means something which is sanctified.
That's right.
Which means that when a person gets married, he goes into a state of kiddushin, he's already learning straight away that the concept of marriage is not just the physical dimension of marriage, but there's a spiritual dimension as well, which is going to draw them to places that they couldn't reach otherwise.
Right. Did you ever hear the expression, it's better to marry than burn?
No. What we're being taught in Judaism is something a little bit different, which is that the ability to enjoy the physical world, to enjoy the physicality within the physical world is something which is built in. We are human beings, and the physical dimension of who we are is giving us license. Judaism gives us license to enjoy the physical delights of this world in a kosher way, right? Yeah.
I'm just this 38 years and the number of encampments.
Oh yeah, right.
It's almost like the encampments were the journey, and the encampments and the journey to get from each.
Yeah. Which means like this. I think for Ket, I think that the analogy of the pearl necklace again. Each encampment is a pearl. The string that strings it all together is the journey that takes them from one encampment to the next. Which means that the actual journey itself is perhaps of lesser importance than the fact that they end up in a particular place for however long they're there. And we spoke about that in Parshat Masai. We spoke about that famous moment with Rav Chaim Volozhiner when he said that each of these 42 stops are 42 stops in Jewish history until the Mashiach comes, and we're going to wander from place to place until we get there, right? And I think that you're right. I think that the wandering around is really just a vehicle. I guess it's not, but pun intended, right? The wandering around is a vehicle that's going to bring us to the next stop that we need to be at, which is going to put down some kind of spiritual DNA that's required for the future until we get to the final stop and we come into the land of Israel.
So that's where we are now.
Yes and no. I mean, according to this whole journey-like concept, so maybe where we are right now is we're in the land of Israel, but we're in the land of Israel perhaps in a Joshua-like way, which is trying to conquer the land of Israel and not yet having established ourselves properly in the land of Israel. Anyway, the Nathan Vanessa, we just turned over the page. That Nathan Vanessa Midbara Derech Yamsuf Kasher Diba Hashem Elai V'Nosov Es Har Sa'ir Yamim Rabim. And then we turned and we journeyed towards the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, which is the Red Sea, which I once read many years ago that the Red Sea used to be the Reed Sea, and then at some point there was some kind of a typo, and then the Reed Sea became the Red Sea, and that's why it's called the Red Sea. I don't know if you've been down there, it's very beautiful, but it's not red. The sea is actually blue. But that's where we end up. The Nosav is Har Seir Yamim Rabim, and circled Har Seir. Har Seir, of course, is where Esav went down to Seir. That became his country. Where is Seir exactly? I don't know. There are many different possibilities of where it might be.
Is that where Esau journeyed away from Yaakov?
Yeah. When Esav moved away from Yaakov, he went down to Seir. It's a very fertile, very beautiful place, according to the descriptions. Where is it exactly? It's really not sure.
It's in the Middle East, though. Yeah.
According to some opinions, a lot of opinions say that it might be around Saudi Arabia somewhere. I saw an opinion which says that it was in Italy. Yeah. Seir is Italy. That's where the Roman Empire, of course, established itself, and that was the continuation of Esav. Whatever. Italy, of course, is a very, very beautiful place. It's a very it's a very fertile place. Could it be maybe it's part of Seir? Maybe Seir is some kind of an enormous thing. Har Seir, I don't know where it is, but that's where the Jewish people ended up. Vayom Hashem elai lemor. So God said to me like this, Rav lachem, stop going around the mountain, so the Sahara there, Panu lachem tzafoina. You're now going to go towards the north. Now, what does Panu lachem tzafoina mean? So tzafoina means, again, in the simple understanding, we're talking about getting to the eastern bank of the Jordan to be able to cross over into the land of Israel. But in the hidden dimensions, you know the word tzafon, tzafun means to be hidden. The afikomen, the part of the afikomen where it's hidden away on Seder night, that's called tzafun. In the different stages of the Haggadah, there's one called tzafun. Tzafun means to be hidden. Tzafon, north, normally talks. It's normally some kind of a hint towards things which are not clear. So, for example, we're taught in the prophets, we're taught that Milchemes Gog and Magog, this war that's going to take place, the king of Magog, this fellow called Gog, who's going to come from the Tzafon, he's going to come from the north. Where is the north? I'm not convinced that the north is necessarily a geographic location. The north is referring to something which is hidden, something which is not clear. And over here, because we're getting towards the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, it's saying, Panu lachem tzafoina, that you're going to go into a stage of darkness. You're going to go into a stage where things are not clear. Moshe Rabbeinu wants to go into the land of Israel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't let him go into the land of Israel. There's going to be a state of unclarity. It's interesting, amongst the early authorities, what are known as the Rishonim, there are several references to the fact that Germany is Tzafon. There's a certain darkness that hangs over Germany, the country of Germany, the people of Germany, some kind of spiritual darkness which hangs over there, which is something which is, undefinable. Of course, we've seen, over modern history, we've seen exactly how that turned itself into what it turned itself into. For many, many years, Germany, of course, was a reasonably benign place for the Jews to be. They lived over there and established themselves and established their communities over there.
There were periods in German history when they were violently anti-Semitic.
Oh, throughout the whole of European history, there's no real lull in anti-Semitism throughout European history. But Germany, up until the Second World War, Germany was a place which was less anti-Semitic than the more eastern countries. Places like Lithuania, places like, just keep going up, right? Russia, the Ukraine, like these places were now vehemently anti-Semitic. And the more Western European countries were a little bit more genteel, which means that they weren't, it's not that they weren't anti-Semitic, they like to, cover it up a little bit and pretend that sometimes they weren't.
My father came from Frankfurt, and he told me that the Jewish community in Frankfurt was rich and full of doctors and lawyers
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Indian chiefs and artists.
Yeah.
It was a whole beautiful community.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Just wasn't. It wasn't.
the German people didn't bother them at all.
Yeah. But all it took was one click of the fingers for for things to change, or perhaps one click.
As soon as Hitler got elected.
One click of the heels, and that was it. Do you know that there was Rav Hutner, Rav Yitzchak Hutner was one of the greatest thinkers from the previous generation. He was in Slobodka, and somebody had come back from Slobodka. He'd been in Germany, one of the Talmidim. He'd been in Germany, and he came back to the yeshiva, and he was telling them how cultured Germany was. And one of the things that he wanted to bring as a proof of the culture of Germany is that in the German language, very often at the end of a sentence they'll say nicht wahr. Nicht wahr means isn't it so, which means that they're not going to impose their opinion upon you. They'll end up by saying, how do I get to the central bus station? Well, you should take the number 4 bus, nicht wahr, isn't that so, like that. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm suggesting. So he wanted to say that one of the ways that you can see how cultured the German nation is through the politeness of their speech. And in Slobodka they disagreed with him, and Rav Hutner was very, very, very vocal in his disagreement. He said the whole thing is nothing, it doesn't mean anything, and these people can behave like animals. He says they speak nicely, so what? It doesn't mean a thing. Years later, when Rav Hutner was the Rosh Hashiva in Chai Berlin in New York. So an old Jew came to meet him, and he didn't recognize him. Rav Hutner didn't recognize him, but he got up to wish him, Shalom Aleichem, and he went over to held out his hand to say hello to him, and the fellow held up his arm to show him that he didn't have a hand. And he says to him, "You don't remember me." He says, "But I was the bocher that we argued about the German people, how cultured the German people are. And I told you that because they said nicht wahr at the end of their sentences, that was a sign of how cultured they were and that we don't have to be concerned about the Germans. And you told me that it wasn't true." He says, "And I just want to let you know," he says, "I have no hand today." He said, "I got taken off to the camps. And in one of the camps, the commandant one morning decided to have a little bit of fun. And he called me over and he started sawing off my hand with his bayonet. And the whole time he kept saying to me in German, right, it hurts, Jew, nicht wahr? It hurts, nicht wahr?" And he says, "You were right and I was wrong." Which means we should never ever be taken in by a veneer of culture. We should never be taken in by a veneer of goodwill.
They get it with their mother's milk.
We're not a very popular people. We're really not. You look around the room, maybe it's understandable, right? But the other nations of the world, they don't like us very much. But that's okay, because the truth is that's where it's supposed to be. Because if they don't like us so much, then we're supposed to retain our identity and to remain who we are in order to be able to have an influence over the rest of the world. How are we going to bring the rest of the world to a recognition that there's one God? Through our believing that there's one God and leading our lives according to that belief. If we do that.
They already do that. They already believe that there's one God.
Yeah, they don't believe that the Jews are the chosen nation.
That's right. But they're monotheistic.
Some of them.
The Christians.
I don't know.
The Muslims.
The Muslims for
Jews.
sure. The Muslims for sure.
My contention is that everybody is Jewish because they learned that from us.
There's a meeting this past Monday at the EU, European Union, and several people said things along the lines that the amount of anti-Semitism today it's as like 1933 as it's ever been. It's never been more like right now. It's just
right. The only thing we don't learn about history is that we have to learn about history. No, history repeats itself. We don't We don't pay very much attention to that. We'll stop over here, Mitzvah Hashem, to be continued.